So to kind of put things into perspective about cybersecurity awareness for SMEs, so 43% of all cyber attacks globally target small businesses. They're seen as a weakest point, and only 14% of those SMBs are prepared to face an attack. That's from Sophos. And personal data was stolen in 45% of all breaches. And the average cost of a data breach was an unprecedented $4.2 million. And SMBs are most vulnerable to supply chain attacks. So that's the kind of set the scene for what we're going to talk about and why that's interesting. So because of that type of threat landscape across Europe, the EU decided to implement what's called NIS2. So it's essentially a set of cybersecurity requirements for organizations across many industries, EU economy. The directive requires those organizations to implement certain cybersecurity measures to secure their networks and information system. Now, it came into force in 2023, but it went live on October 17th last year, 2024. Now, the Irish government have yet to get it through the Oireachtas, and that delay was due to the elections there around December. So that is expected to be made law in around made after the summer. So it is going to be crucial for you. And initially, there was a directive NIS1, which targeted certain businesses. Now that's changed and expanded, and more sanctions and reporting and external audits are now brought into the fore. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So, as I mentioned already, the transposition into law for October 17 last year wasn't made here in Ireland, but it will be this year. And is it applicable for your business? So this is really fundamental to how you sell your services and your products into government and into other national infrastructure businesses. So what you probably need to understand is, are you a named sector? So you've got health, energy, transport, drinking water, digital infrastructure, and digital providers. So chemicals, manufacturing, food distribution, food production, postal and courier services, digital providers, waste management, research, ICT management, wastewater, space, and financial services. So that's the scope. So it took about maybe 100 businesses in NIS1, and it's now nearly over 4,000 businesses are are in scope. So what will it mean for your business, right? You may be asked to be compliant by a regulator, which is being put into place now with the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, being the national competent authority for this space. And they've obviously subbed out for different industries such as health, for example. The HSE is the national competent authority, but they all have obligations to go to the NCSC if there's a breach and work closely with them. And are you required to comply with key clients' needs of any client who's required to be NIS2 compliant? So if you're a third party selling services into an important or essential entity, and I'll go into that, those two terms now in a moment. So if you're a third party supplier, you will also be asked information security questions about how you're handling their data. So this is really, really important when it comes to, if you're a small business trying to get into a larger organization who's also supplying services into a national infrastructure organization that's deemed compliant under NIS2. And then, have you implemented sufficient cybersecurity risk management measures and processes? So all of these management measures are reviewed and understood by your senior executives. So it's taking the responsibility from an IT provider, for example, our IT department, and brought it up to the board level, where the board is held accountable now for their cybersecurity risk measures. And can you implement an incident response plan and incident reporting policies, and are they documented and sufficient? And are you constantly prepared and ready for either a client or regulator audit or review? So this is also part of the compliance features from the national competent authorities. So when you look at the different within this too, cybersecurity risk management is a big part of it, and it's really focusing on the policies, on your risk analysis, your ICT system security, and how you handle an incident. But also look at your backups, your business continuity, disaster recovery, and your supply chain. So your own supply chain, how secure are they? What are they doing with your business, with your information? So security in ICT system development and maintenance, policies, procedures, assessing cyber security risk management, cyber hygiene practices. So that really means about educating your employees not to click on links, for example, and also your policies around encryption and cryptography. So where you're holding your client's data, is it encrypted at rest and in transit? So that's going to be a big part of it. And then your HR security. So access control, who has access to your HR information? Is it MFA enabled? So is it secure? So these are all important steps in cybersecurity risk management. So in terms of governance then, does your board basically approve your cybersecurity risk and management procedures? And do your executives regularly update the board of directors in terms of cybersecurity and digital operation resilience? And have all members of your board of directors been educated and enabled to partake in continuous learning and development in terms of cybersecurity and resilience? And are cybersecurity and digital operation resilience part of both your executive and board meetings? So this would really be around, implementing a risk management framework. So having a risk register, so identifying your cybersecurity risks as well as your other business risks. So in terms of reporting then, this is a really big part of it. So in GDPR, for example, you've got 48 hours to report a breach to the Data Protection Commissioner. Now, with NIS2, you have 24 hours to report an incident that's significant to the NCSC. And then a further incident notification within 72 hours. And then they can ask for intermediate status reports on that incident. And then a final report 1 month after an incident happens. So this is all really, really important now. And the reason for that is that they're looking for this early 24-hour warning is to see across the EU then that they can let the rest of this national competent authorities within each jurisdiction know the type of incident you have so they can be better prepared, or if it's already out there, that they can learn from it how to combat it, or else, if it's a new one, then to make sure that they can shore up their defenses. So that's why that is there. So the supervision and enforcement of it, it's meant to be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. So taking into account the circumstances of each individual case. And because of the long lead time means expectation for preparation is for immediate compliance. So what they can do is on-site inspections, random checks. They can just knock up at your door and see, right, show me your cybersecurity policies, your defense practices, your incident response plan. So these are all important now if you're trying to obviously sell it into larger organizations. They can do security scans externally and internally. They look for documentation, your policies, your data, security audit results. Now, the fines that we're talking about here, if you're an important entity, what's deemed to be an important entity, which is 50 employees or over 10 million of revenue, you can be liable for a fine of up to €7 million or 1.4% of your global revenue. For a large enterprise or essential organizations, it's up to 10 million or 2% of the global revenue. Now, this can also include temporary suspensions of managerial functions for your board of directors or your senior management if they're deemed to be ineffective measures in place. So the supply chain is such an important factor of NIS2. And for example, like the Dublin Airport had an attack back in 2023 from a third party, which was Progress Software's. Move IT file transfer software was actually impacted and used to get in to steal information on 60 million individuals. So every supplier is a potential entry point. And, you know, in order to get in, what a hacker normally does is that, well, the defenses of, say, a large organization is going to be much more difficult to bypass. But if I look at a third party that's supplying into that, I can go, well, absolutely, I'll try and get in there first and see, can I then laterally move into the larger organization's infrastructure through whatever means necessary. So the management of third parties is key part of NIS2. And so you will see, for example, that and I'll go into this a bit later on, that there are questionnaires going to be coming your way about your cybersecurity posture and how secure your environment is. So they can assess and manage risk from supply chain partners, ensure suppliers and partners comply with certain cybersecurity standards, and have integrated security practice, so collaboration across supply chains to bolster the overall security posture. So what would you need to do? Well, check if you're in scope first. And as I mentioned, while you might not be in scope according to the NCSE's criteria and European criteria, because you're a third party, you will be in scope. So raise awareness of the requirements and of the penalties to your senior management. Get some management training around cybersecurity for all senior management and your staff is really best practice. Look at the budget and resourcing review that you need to implement some of the controls, and I'll go into what the controls are now shortly. Have a compliance gap analysis against the minimum controls. So there's 10 minimum controls, and I'll talk about those in a second. So close all those compliance gaps and then look to continually improve. So what are the minimum controls? Well, it's risk analysis and information system security, incident handling, business continuity measures, your own supply chain security, security in system acquisition in your development, if you're doing software development and maintenance, including vulnerability handling and disclosures, having policies and procedures to assess the effectiveness of your cybersecurity risk management framework, basic computer hygiene and training for your staff. So that means doing your security updates, for example, having patch management in place, and then also your policies on encryption, your HR security, and the use of multi-factor authentication across secured voice, video, text communications, and emergency communications. So they're the 10 minimum controls. So the reason we implemented ISO 27001, obviously we wanted to set the bar to say that we handle customers' data very securely, being a cybersecurity company, but there's a huge overlap between ISO 27001 and what's required with NIS2. So you can either go for the certification like Binarii has done and we have done, or you can just align to it. Aligning to it then doesn't mean you go for the certification, but you can put in the controls that are in place and the governance structures that are in place. And so pen testing is going to be obviously a big part, particularly if you're a software provider, that you do that regularly and to be able to show the results of that. So that's just protecting clients that use your platform software depending on what's needed. So the kind of vendor questionnaires, it's the purpose of it is to evaluate your compliance with ISO 27K or the security controls within NIS2. Why it matters, it's a standard for information security. It helps organizations ensure vendors follow strong security practices. And so by having the certification, you take away all of that kind of request for information and just show your cert in some cases that you have this in place. And the use case is really for onboarding new vendors or reviewing current supplier security postures. So that's what these organizations will be doing. And it covers key ISO control families. So this typically is what it would look like. You get your, obviously your questionnaire coming in at you. It'll ask you about the geographic locations of dependent businesses, your product or service, identifiable information, or PII. So it covers a whole lot of different security questions. As you can see, it looks at your organizational security as well. Have you implemented training? So there's a lot here that would need to be answered. So pen testing, as I mentioned, is a big part of it. So I'll hand over to Aidan now to cover some of the data security threats.
Thanks, Dave.
Could I just come in there for a second, Aidan, just to say thank you, David, for that. And there is a Q&A button down the bottom of the screen. So if you have any questions, any of the participants here, you can put the questions in there, and we will get to them in about 10-15 minutes from now after Aidan's presentation, and go through those. So any questions in the Q&A button down on the bottom of the screen there. Sorry, Aidan, over to you.
Thanks, Martin. So maybe just take a little step back before we go into this. I mean, what we're talking about here is the typical process, and the typical process is that, you're required to store your data, you're required to make sure it's secure, you're required to ensure that there are, generally speaking, not even getting into regulation, you should be ensuring that your stakeholder data is secure, and if there's any incident or issue, that you have a backup and you have access to it. The thing to consider in the context of just following on from what David has said, in considering what this might mean to you, as an SME or an SMB, as Martin said earlier, supplying into and being a part of the supply chain of an NIS2 regulated company. Think about it like this. David has just read some pretty heavy penalties that those organizations are going to face. It's up to 1.4% of global revenue. This is not profit. So imagine a loss-making business who's turning over 10 million a year being hit with a penalty of 2% or 1.4% of that, even though they're already a loss-making business or barely making profit. Even if they're profitable, it's a huge, huge consideration and risk. So then you got to ask yourself, well, why would they take that risk on you? Because if you're the one who's supplying them with a service or a business, and they have to differentiate between various service providers who all do what you do in different ways, what they are already doing, and what we have had to do as an organization actually is sit in with client companies and actually present an incredibly detailed walkthrough of how they are securing their clients' data, i.e. the NIS2 regulated sector company data, to their satisfaction in order for them to even be allowed to submit an RFQ or never even mind actually win the business. So people who are already in business with these have seen these surveys and questionnaires and checklists that David has presented, but we've seen them even go further. So at the moment, they would look at the status quo, and the status quo is the kind of stock questions. Where's your data stored? Where's our data stored? If you're holding stakeholder data, and this could be as much as sending information about the design features on the widgets that you build to supply them, or it could be proprietary information. It really doesn't matter. Once you are handling any information that's relevant to that company, you are likely to be asked by that company to account for how you keep it secure. Is the data encrypted? Where is it stored? One question is, in terms, which is slightly different, is how do you prove ownership? It's actually more who owns the data and where is that custody held so that the owner can claim it essentially at any stage. So if we jump on to the next slide.
Yeah, just frozen a bit. There we go.
Yeah. So these are the challenges that are being faced and questions that are being asked with NIS2. David mentioned that this has now gone to senior executive level. What that means is the boards of these companies as individuals, no longer as a group. The buck stops with them individually and even personally, right down to criminal prosecution and being stripped of directorships if there's negligence. So you've got the fines for the company, but you've also got personal the opportunity or capability of the National Cybersecurity Centres to pursue an individual for negligence in terms of how they did or did not ensure digital operation resilience. These challenges are data sovereignty. So what does that mean? Well, if you're depending on a single provider and you're providing all of your files to that single provider, you are now wholly dependent on that provider. And that's really not good enough, not even from a broad perspective, but specifically in the acts and directives where they'd speak about data storage contingency being a requirement and proving how you have it. So if you've got a problem with a location, you're okay because you have another location. Technical complexity is a huge issue here because as SMEs and SMBs, and by the way, bring it back to if you're preparing a business plan right now where you believe you're going to be pitching into a sector, it's pretty soon the likes of Martin and Enterprise Ireland are going to be asking you, how are you preparing for this in your business plan? Because if you go looking for investment and you haven't considered the cost or the implementation or the practical steps in your business that says we understand these requirements and we're able and prepared once we raise money to implement X, Y, and Z, chances are you may be overlooked from the prospect of getting investment, never mind getting business. The big problem for you though is technical complexity and cost. So that's a huge issue. It's incredibly expensive sometimes to go about setting up all these complex systems. So this is what we have implemented, which is a proprietary solution that changes the way that a data file journey goes through its journey, if you like, from upload to its storage destination. As it's right now, if you upload a file, it goes into your chosen storage location. And when it's in there, it's up to you to put in security measures or ask the likes of ComSec to help to put in security measures that ensure that that location is secure. You then have to it's most recommended, put in place a backup, which is another location. The problem there is that you're sending complete files to each location. And if any one of those locations is breached or you lose access to it for whatever reason, you have lost complete files. And when you have lost complete files, a backup is not always the answer because it can take days and weeks and sometimes even months to access that backup. And this is why the Act speaks about digital operation resilience rather than just cybersecurity. So having the ability to prove and demonstrate how you have business continuity by having continued access to your file is a requirement of the regulation. How do you do that if you have a backup? Well, you've got to access that backup. You've got to have a way to take those files essentially out of backup and put them essentially into play as they normally were in the previous location that has been breached. But that's a complex thing. It takes time and it has to be very careful because the bad actor may still be there. So that's a major challenge. The next question in regulation is, what is your disaster recovery plan? What are you going to do? What are your detailed processes that outline what you're going to do when this happens? Because it happens every 44 seconds globally. And that's the reality. A successful breach is occurring globally, 24/7, nonstop, every 44 seconds. So very quickly, we change the landscape. We allow you, the entity, to own 3 locations that are yours, not ours. So number one, we're not asking you to trust us to store your data. We're saying we can help to place your data securely in your own storage location in such a way that you can trust the storage provider that they are going to give you the service that they promise that you pay for, but also not trust them enough to give them ever a complete file. So what happens is the data file at the top gets uploaded. Immediately it's backed up by creating a duplication. And if you can imagine those 2 files, they're encrypted heavily and then broken up into these fragments that you see on screen. Then the fragments are sent partially to each location of yours. And this is important. They're sent with a guarantee that no one storage location will ever hold any one complete file, ever. And that you will always have the access to the complete file out of any 2 of the 3. And that's the basis on which our solution enables you to have cloud contingency or data storage contingency, continuous access to the data, even if one of those locations goes down, and protection absolute of that data in each environment from bad actors, because if one location goes down or is breached, the bad actor has only accessed useless and incomplete files. So that's where we come in. So I've actually said all this for the most part, I think. One interesting element of the requirement of NIS2, David mentioned, which is also incredibly difficult to do, is that urgency of reporting. So there's two reasons they want to report. One is the severity of breach requires you to report, and two, information sharing is where they want to get the information on something that happened that was not reaching the severity. And in that case, you don't have the requirement for ongoing reporting, but you're helping the NCSC, as David said earlier, by giving them the information so they can build profiles of how things happened. The problem with reaching a severity of report, in addition to the problem you have with what's just happened in your organization, is you also have to be clear and provide clear communications when oftentimes you're not even clear yourself what's happening within 24 hours to the National Cybersecurity Centre, again within 72 hours, and then ongoing for months and months and months until they're satisfied the case is resolved. That's a huge burden and a strain on any organization to do. And by eliminating the severity of the breach, by ensuring that in our case, they've only accessed useless and incomplete information, you are actually ensuring that not only are you protecting the stakeholder data, but you're protecting yourself and from all of the additional admin and time and cost consumed with that. So sovereign ownership of data is just one thing I'll mention on this. It's a really interesting challenge. Right now, Europe are speaking about data sovereignty as important. What do they mean? They mean they want to know that you are placing your information in locations that are ring-fenced from other nations or other private companies, maybe. So if you're using a cloud provider, there are lots of reasons that some government contracts would want you to be EU data sovereign. It's a big challenge and it's great difficulty. We would challenge that whole premise by saying it is only the enterprise themselves that should have sovereign ownership of data, not the storage companies who are providing you with a service to store them. Because whether they're in Europe or whether they're in the US, and by the way, right now, almost 70% of the entire data storage of enterprise data is controlled and managed and owned by 4 private US companies. And the largest EU player is only 3% market share. So it's a major challenge, even on a macro level, when you zoom out to say, where do I put my data? And how do I put it in a place that I know I can satisfy clients that it's not only secure, but that we have sovereign ownership of it. If you're the only one who can access it in complete form, you have ownership. If each of your storage providers can only access it in incomplete form, they don't.
Great, Kieran. Or sorry.
That's the other one.
That's the other one, yeah. Thanks a million for that. I suppose, look, what you're really looking at here, for an SMB, right? There's cost, okay, in putting in cybersecurity measures on top of every other cost that you have. But what we really want to share today as well is that Enterprise Ireland have a cybersecurity review grant, which is 80% funded of €3,000. So you get basically 2,400 of the $3,000 paid to carry out an assessment by certified providers such as ourselves that can do that assessment. And they're also partnered with the NCSC and Cyber Ireland on this. So we're a Cyber Ireland member, as I mentioned. So we're also authorized to actually carry out these assessments. And it's bespoke solutions for all different key areas. And it's a kind of first step in threat management that identifies your risks, like how your security posture is at the moment, what you would need to do to bolster it, but also taking into consideration just the practical side of things, that there's no point in spending a huge amount of money on cybersecurity, if it's going to put you out of business. So it has to be proportional. So there's certain things you can do very, very quickly that don't cost a whole lot of money, like even awareness training. There's free tools out there that can actually help you just even train your staff and train yourself maybe in terms of cybersecurity. look, implementing MFA is another easy one to do. It doesn't cost a fortune. A lot of the applications that people use, it already is part of it. So logging on to Microsoft, for example, you have multi-factor authentication. But if you're developing your own software, do make sure you have MFA implemented as well. So it's just that added security layer, and doing your basic security hygiene, such as your software security updates, like that, doing that, training your staff, and what you call it, putting in MFA, that will stop over 90% of attacks. So it's very, very simple things to do, and that's what I would recommend.
Good. If we could finish up reasonably soon so that we
Yeah.
can get to some of the Q&A.
So there's a QR code there to help you go into the Enterprise Ireland grant, and gives you some information on it. And what's assessed under it is, it's basically everything under NIS2 that we talked about, the security controls that are in there. And, having some type of monitoring in your infrastructure as well, of somebody looking at what's happening 24/7, is also very good part of covering most of the things that could go wrong for your organization, but also complying with NIS2 and ISO. And there's different solutions out there, depending. You can have endpoint security only, like your antivirus. You can have a managed detection and response, or a managed SOC.